has been using its position within the WTO to take advantage of other nations. Washington's ambassador to the WTO, Dennis Shea, accused China of failing to fully embrace the open, market-oriented policies on which the organization is founded, stressing that this should be addressed for the WTO to remain relevant to the international trading system. Firing back, China defended its record, pointing out how it has significantly lowered import tariffs. China's Vice Commerce Minister then took indirect aim at the Trump administration, urging the WTO to stand up to protectionism.
The multilateral trading system is now confronted with severe challenges. We would like to call on all WTO members to resolutely defend the fundamental principles and core values of the multilateral trading system.
The latest standoff came shortly after the Trump administration raised the stakes in its trade dispute with Beijing on Wednesday, threatening 10% tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese goods in response to China's imposition of tit-for-tat tariffs of 25% on $34 billion worth of U.S. exports last Friday. Those tariffs came a matter of hours after President Trump announced the U.S. was imposing its first round of 25% tariffs on $34 billion of Chinese imports. Kim Dong-yeon, Arirang News.
And also watching this closely are the stock market's movers and shakers. South Korean shares opened a bit higher this Thursday following the Trump administration's release of another list of 10% duties on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. The benchmark Kospi opened the day up a little at 2285.9, up 0.2% after closing the previous day down by 0.6%. And the junior bourse Kosdaq also opened up slightly at 809.8, up 5 points. And over in the U.S., stocks closed sharply lower on Wednesday. The Dow Jones ended its long winning streak, dipping more than 210 points to close the day at 24,700.4. And the S&P 500 too dropped 0.7%, while the Nasdaq also closed at 7716, down over 40 points. And the country's top economic policymakers are meeting as we speak over some of the daunting issues threatening the country's efforts to steady the economy, following the escalation of trade tensions between the world's two superpowers and the country's latest disappointing job figures that showed no sign of improvement. For more on this, we get the latest from our Won Jung-hwan, who has been following this story for us. So, Jung-hwan, what can we expect from today's meeting?
Hi, Samin. There are two main issues at hand. Starting from 10 a.m., Finance Minister Kim Dong-yeon and the heads of ministries related to the economy have gathered together to discuss the urgent economic issues impacting the country. And they will discuss ways to deal with global trade issues amid an escalating trade war between the United States and China. The government is worried because the growing trade spat between the world's two superpowers could wreak havoc on Korean exporters, as the U.S. and China are Korea's top to export markets. And another critical issue to be discussed during the meeting today, the recent jobs report. The latest job figures by Statistics Korea showed the country only saw its job growth remain in the 100,000 level in June, the fifth straight month it has been in that range. So we may perhaps see some policy adjustment aimed at improving those job figures. Back to you, Simon.
All right, our Won Jung-hwan following that emergency meeting on economy. Thank you. And now to the monetary front. This just coming in, we are learning that the Bank of Korea has kept its benchmark interest rate steady at 1.5% for the month of July. Now, the freeze came at the first monetary policy meeting for the second half of 2018, and this is after raising its key rate by 0.25 of a percentage point last November, the first rate hike in over 6 years. The BOK has opted to stand pat yet again. And we'll bring you more details during our next newscast at noon Korea time. In other news, President Moon Jae-in is in Singapore on the second and final leg of his 6-day two-nation tour, which also took him to India. In Singapore, the South Korean leader will continue his diplomatic efforts to expand the nation's business horizons. Traveling with the president, our Moon Gun-young reports from Singapore.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in landed in Singapore from India Wednesday evening for a 3-day state visit here, the first by South Korean president in 15 years. His first full day in the Southeast Asian country kicks off on this Thursday with an official welcome at the Istana, or the Presidential Palace, before a bilateral summit with Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. The two leaders will witness the exchange of several memoranda of understanding to boost cooperation in the areas of trade, environment, small and medium enterprises, and startups. Although most of the day's focus will be on promoting business relations between the two economies, with the South Korea-Singapore Business Forum also scheduled for the afternoon, Messrs. Moon and Lee will also likely discuss developments on the Korean Peninsula. The security situation has become less tense this year, with missile launches by North Korea replaced by historic meetings and dialogue, namely President Moon's two summits with North Korean leader Kim Dong-yeon and the North Korea-US summit on June 12th right here in Singapore. But the highlight of President Moon's Singapore leg will come on the third and final day of his state visit, when he delivers the 42nd Singapore lecture, where he'll lay out his vision and policies for a permanent peace and denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Traveling with the South Korean President, Moon Gon-young, Arirang News, Singapore.
And staying with that topic, ahead of his trip to Singapore, President Moon granted an interview to a local daily in the Southeast Asian city-state. He touted the strength of the two countries' bilateral ties, in particular stressing how their economies complement one another. Our Cha Sang-mi tells us more.
South Korea's presidential Blue House has shared President Moon Jae-in's written interview with Singapore's The Straits Times ahead of his state visit to the Southeast Asian city-state. President Moon called for a future-oriented, complementary, and mutually reciprocal relationship between the two countries, South Korea with its outstanding technical skills and experience, and Singapore's abundant know-how and capital strength. Asked about the new policy he unveiled in November of last year, President Moon said the new Southern policy is aimed at deepening ties with Southeast Asian nations, including Singapore, to build a future partnership for what he dubs the three Ps: people, prosperity, and peace. He also reaffirmed his wish to upgrade Seoul's ties with ASEAN to the level of its ties with four major powers: the US, China, Japan, and Russia. When it comes to Seoul-Singapore economic cooperation, Moon said the two sides are already important economic partners, as he noted that many Korean companies are taking part in a landmark construction project in Singapore. He further added that he sees more chances can open up for those firms in transportation and expansion of infrastructure, as well as to prepare for the fourth industrial revolution through joint research in artificial intelligence, big data, and fintech. On the rapid developments on the Korean Peninsula, President Moon said now is a time of major changes, a shift from war to peace, and vowed to lay out the right direction towards denuclearization and lasting peace. He emphasized the role of the international community, including Singapore, in this shift after the two inter-Korean summits and especially the recent Pyongyang-Washington summit in Singapore. He also praised and thanked Singapore, the chair of the ASEAN for 2018, for serving as an excellent host during the successful North Korea-US summit, and said he was sure the two nations chose Singapore due to the global trust it has garnered over the years. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Officials from North Korea and the United States are set to meet again at the inter-Korean border of Panmunjom this morning to talk Pyongyang's promise to return the remains of American soldiers who were killed in action in the north during the Korean War. With the U.S. sending 100 temporary wooden caskets to Panmunjom for the remains to be sent over, the two sides are expected to discuss when and how the American troops will actually return home. The remains are expected to be sent from South Korea to either Hawaii or Nebraska for identification once the two sides agree on a date. And staying with that story, we now take a look at the process of the homecoming for the fallen American soldiers. When it happens, it'll be the first such transfer in decades, but comes amid questions as to why it's taking so long when the North agreed to the repatriation during last month's summit in Singapore. Our EG1 reports.
The first ever return of American troops killed in the North during the Korean War took place just a year after hostilities ceased in 1953. As agreed, the opposing sides in 1954 exchanged the remains of soldiers they had found, which meant some 2,200 Americans were laid to rest at home. But it wasn't until 1990 that the repatriation of soldiers was officially brought up again. In 1990, the repatriations resumed as Pyongyang wanted to improve ties with Washington. It sent the remains of 5 soldiers through the inter-Korean truce village of Panmunjom. There have been more than 30 joint searches for U.S. troops left behind, but the last time any were repatriated was in 2007, as ties between Pyongyang and Washington deteriorated due to North Korea's growing nuclear threat. Things got tense at times. For instance, when the remains were found to include animal bones, something North Korea was accused of doing deliberately. As of now, an estimated 635 sets of remains have been sent back, with 334 of them identified. But this is only the tip of the iceberg, considering that America's Defense Department estimates the remains of some 5,300 U.S. service members to be still in North Korea, nearly half of them believed to be near the demilitarized zone that divides the two Koreas. And now, after 11 years, hope has re-emerged with a promise from North Korea to return as many as 200 sets of remains of America's fallen heroes as a result of the first ever North Korea-U.S. summit. In late June, the U.S. sent 100 temporary wooden caskets to Panmunjom to hold the remains to be sent over, while separately, 158 metal coffins have been moved to the Osan Air Base in South Korea's Gyeonggi-do province, where the remains are to be transferred later on. The remains are then expected to be sent from South Korea to either Hawaii or Nebraska for identification. It's unclear whether the remains will be returned after the talks on Thursday, but U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said that could be the first step to improving ties, so there's a great deal of anticipation that North Korea and the U.S. could be able to officially start implementing the joint statement signed in Singapore last month. 이지원, Arirang News.
The UN's top official on humanitarian issues says North Korea will receive a total of $110 million assistance package through donations by UN member nations. Mark Lowcock, the UN's Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, says he had seen, quote, clear evidence of need in North Korea during a rare trip to the regime. In a video posted on Twitter, the UN aid chief said more than half of the children in rural areas have no clean water and that some 20% of the children in the country have malnutrition. Lowcock's trip to the north is the first by an emergency relief coordinator since 2011. U.S. President Donald Trump has urged NATO allies to double their military spending to 4% of their GDP. And those comments on Wednesday coming while attending a NATO summit in Brussels. For more on this and other news around the world, we turn to our Do Aram at the News Center. So Aram, how did the summit go?
Well, some NATO members seemed quite bewildered by Trump's comments. The issue of defense spending and improved burden sharing are issues Trump has repeatedly harped on, but NATO says Trump's proposed target of 4% of GDP on military spending is not even being met by the United States itself. Trump had earlier said Washington spends 4.2%, but according to numbers released by NATO, it spent an estimated 3.5% on defense this year, which is actually lower than last year's figure. He also singled out Germany for not pulling its weight, saying Berlin only spends a little over 1%. NATO figures show Germany spends just under 1.25%. When asked about Trump's proposal, this is what NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg had to say.
Well, I will focus on what we have agreed, and we have agreed to be committed to the pledge increasing defense spending to 2%. And let's start with that. So we have a way to go, but the good news is that we have really started to deliver.
Despite Trump's complaints, he did sign the joint communique in which NATO members agreed to focus on more defense spending and burden sharing. They also pledged to bolster the alliance's deterrence and defense capabilities to counter Russian threats. The joint communique comes just days before Trump meets Russian President Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. In other news, British police say they have briefly spoken to a man who was poisoned by the Novichok nerve agent in the English town of Amesbury at the end of last month. Charlie Rowley had regained consciousness a few days ago, and Scotland Yard said he is no longer in critical condition. Police said they spoke to him to get more details on how he and his girlfriend, who unfortunately died on Sunday, were exposed to the deadly nerve agent. Police are also investigating whether there is a link between last month's incident and the Novichok poisoning of former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter back in March. The UK had accused Russia of that attack, but Moscow has continued to deny any involvement. The first video of the 12 boys and their football coach who were rescued from a flooded cave in Thailand has emerged. The boys, wearing face masks and hospital gowns, appear to be in relatively good condition. Some are making hand gestures and victory signs to show that they are okay. The parents are able to see their children, however, only through protective glass, as doctors want to keep the boys in a carefully controlled environment out of concern for their health. The 13 members of the wild boar football team had been trapped for nearly 3 weeks inside the cave in Chiang Mai province. They were pulled out in a dramatic 3-day rescue operation that captivated the world.
And turning now to the latest from the 2018 World Cup in Russia. After Tuesday's relatively dull first semifinal between France and Belgium, England and Croatia served up a classic semi on Wednesday, packed with goals, near misses, and plenty of other drama. Telling us who will actually face France in Sunday's final is our Lee Seung-jae.
Over 78,000 fans packed into Moscow's Luzhniki Stadium on Wednesday to watch England and Croatia square off for a spot in Sunday's World Cup final. With France already earning their place on Tuesday, would it be England making their first final since they won the tournament in 1966, or Croatia advancing to their first ever World Cup final? The first goal came quickly with Kieran Trippier's superb free kick in the 5th minute, giving England the early lead. That's how the score remained until the halftime, despite some strong pressing by the Croatians. The second half began with Croatia continuing where they left off. And in the 68th minute, the breakthrough came when Semej Vasiliko's long cross found Ivan Perisic open for the header to level things at 1 apiece. The match heads to extra time, where in the 109th minute, Mario Mandzukic is left wide open after a headed pass from Ivan Perisic as a Juventus striker slips his shot past England keeper Jordan Pickford for the 2-1 lead. Croatia's defense does the rest as the Eastern Europeans win and advance to their first ever World Cup final. The final two, Croatia and France, will duke it out in Moscow early Sunday evening local time for the most coveted prize in world football. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
One of the main pillars of the fourth industrial revolution is artificial intelligence. And to give a boost to those heavily involved in the rapidly up-and-coming industry, an event was held in Seoul to help the firms link up with their potential investors. Our Ko Ryun-hee tells us more.
For a vision test, all you need is a smartphone. Kwon Tae-yeon, the founder of an artificial intelligence company, developed an application that takes a photo of your eye to test your vision. The system can automatically measure the eye's refraction and tell whether glasses are necessary or not. Kwon decided to attend the AI Expo Korea's Idea Contest, prepared by the Korea Artificial Intelligence Association, to seek out potential investors. There, entrepreneurs like Kwon had a chance to present their ideas and services and compete for the top prize, which included mentoring from AI experts.
Here, I got to meet a lot of investors and representatives in the AI field. We were able to find ways to communicate in the future.
More than 70 AI-based companies participated in the expo. They set up booths and introduced their products and services related to machine learning, image recognition, and big data. They say this kind of opportunity is rare.
Many small and medium-sized businesses in the AI field lack opportunities to promote their products. By participating in this expo, we were able to advertise our products to many people.
Many investors who came to our booth were really interested in the fact that the adoption of AI by the beauty industry. They thought this could work well not only in Korea but also in the global market. I'm looking forward to more meetings.
Aside from the networking opportunities, there were almost 10,000 ordinary people who came, not only to learn about the emerging industry, but to have fun. Visitors can enjoy many hands-on experiences at the event. This artificial intelligence technology instantly analyzes your skin after taking a photo. The Korea Artificial Intelligence Association says it aims to draw an even bigger crowd at next year's event to foster the development of this quickly advancing technology. In 2019, they plan to invite companies and investors from other countries like China and Japan. 고륜이, Arirang News.
The South Korean capital's Seoul 7017 project puts people first ahead of cars and says more traffic does not equate to a better quality of life. Our Hong Yu tells us more on some of the reactions to that plan.
An old overpass for vehicles next to Seoul Station has been transformed into a path for people. Just over a year has passed since Seoul 7017 was created by the Seoul Metropolitan Government, and in that year it has been used over 10 million times. With Seoul, the city government wanted to revitalize the area near Seoul Station, and after just 1 year, the number of pedestrians has increased by about 25%, the number of retailers has increased by 140%, and sales have risen by 42%.
After the success of the project, Seoul City announced last week that it will create new pedestrian zones, starting with Seocheon and Uljiro this year, to make Seoul into a city for pedestrians by 2020.
When green transportation, such as walking or public transportation, takes over, the city will be cleaner and more active, as well as more attractive for tourists. This is why we're pushing ahead with this plan.
According to a survey of 680 citizens that have used Seoul, about 69% were satisfied with the project.
For me, it seems like a good idea because people can spend more time walking with their friends, and it's also good for the environment.
But expanding the pedestrian zones will mean vehicles will face speed limits, and already congested roads such as Haejongdae-do will be reduced from 10 lanes to 5 lanes.
I'm definitely against it. The roads here are already crowded, and downsizing them to half the size would make the matter worse.
Practically speaking, there are some difficulties in completing this plan by 2020 because, first of all, there is the transportation flow problem to solve and the costs of realizing the plan.
The designs for the plan will be made starting next year, and the construction will begin in 2020 to be completed by mid-2021. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
Good morning. Seoul had its first tropical night of the season last night, which came a day later than it did last year. And as the monsoon season comes to an end, the blistering heat sets in. So heat wave alerts are in place across much of the country. Heat warnings are in place across many of the southern regions, including Busan and Daegu, while sizzling sunshine will boost UV rays to very high levels today. In most parts, we'll see temperatures 2 to 3 degrees higher than yesterday, getting up to 32 degrees Celsius here in the capital. 35 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju, Daejeon and Gwangju this afternoon. So for today, wear light colors and stay hydrated with cool drinks. So we are advised to be extra careful for the next 5 days as stifling heat with strong sunshine is in the forecast. And highs will be hovering in the low 30s for the northern regions and mid-30s for the southern provinces. That's Korea for you, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
And that'll do it for us at the hour on Arirang News, but keep it tuned for more news updates coming up at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching and goodbye for now.